The smell of fresh bread and sizzling steaks filled the air at the Golden Plate as the evening crowd began to arrive. Lily had been on her feet for almost 10 hours already, but you couldn't tell from the genuine smile she wore. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly in a bun, and despite the small coffee stain on her sleeve from the morning rush, her uniform looked crisp and professional. "Table 7 needs more water," called out the head waiter as Lily finished writing down an order for a family of 4. "On it," she replied, quickly grabbing a pitcher from the service station. This was her life for the past 3 years, rushing between tables, memorizing special requests, and somehow managing to keep everyone happy while they enjoyed their meals. The Golden Plate wasn't just any restaurant, it was the place where the city's rich and famous came to see and be seen. The walls were decorated with original artwork, and the silverware was actually made of silver. But Lily didn't mind the fancy atmosphere. The tips were good, and she needed every penny. After her shift ended at 11 p.m., she would head straight home, catch 4 hours of sleep, then wake up to study her nursing textbooks before her morning classes started at the community college. "How do you do it?" her coworker Raj often asked her. "I'm dead after one shift, and you're doing doubles plus school." Lily would just shrug and say, "One day at a time." But the truth was more complicated. Her little brother and sister were counting on her since their parents had gotten sick. The thought of them was enough to keep her going on even the toughest days. Tonight was Friday, which meant the restaurant would be packed. Lily checked her appearance in the reflection of a polished serving tray. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could fully hide, but her smile still reached her eyes. That smile had earned her many regular customers who requested her section. "Heads up, everyone," the restaurant manager announced during their pre-shift meeting. "We've got some VIPs coming in tonight. Mr. Stone and his business partners have reserved the large table by the window." A collective groan went through the staff. Mr. Stone was infamous among the waitstaff. A real estate billionaire with a reputation for being impossible to please and tight with tips despite his massive wealth. "Who's got that section tonight?" someone asked. The manager looked directly at Lily. "It's your section. You're our best. If anyone can handle him, it's you." Lily felt her stomach tighten, but she nodded. "I'll do my best." As she helped set up the special table with the finest china and crystal glasses, Lily thought about the nursing exam she had on Monday. She still needed to review 2 chapters over the weekend, plus finish a paper. If she could just get through this night with a decent tip from Mr. Stone's table, maybe she could cut back on Sunday's shift and have more study time. Little did she know that this ordinary Friday night would change everything. As she folded the last napkin into a perfect fan shape and placed it on the table, Lily had no idea that in just a few hours, her life would take a dramatic turn. The man who would walk through those doors was about to push her to her limits, but what happened next would leave everyone in the restaurant speechless. The hostess caught her eye from across the room and motioned toward the door. They had arrived. Lily took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "Here we go," she whispered to herself, walking toward the entrance with her order pad ready and her best professional smile in place. The front doors of the Golden Plate swung open, and a blast of cold evening air swept through the restaurant. Conversations quieted as heads turned to watch the newcomers. Mr. Stone entered first, his tall figure commanding attention without effort. His custom-tailored suit probably cost more than Lily's entire year of college tuition. Behind him followed 5 men and 2 women, all dressed in business attire that screamed money and power. "Good evening, Mr. Stone," the hostess greeted with a slight bow of her head. "Your table is ready." Mr. Stone didn't respond. He simply handed her his cashmere coat and walked past, his eyes scanning the restaurant as if he was inspecting property he might buy. The hostess shot Lily a quick glance that said, "Good luck," as she led the group to the large window table in Lily's section. Lily gave them a moment to settle in before approaching. She'd learned from experience that people like Mr. Stone preferred to feel in control of every situation, including when their server appeared. "Just be yourself," Raj whispered as he passed by with a tray of drinks. "And maybe duck if he throws something." Lily rolled her eyes at him, but couldn't help the nervous flutter in her stomach. The stories about Mr. Stone were legendary among restaurant staff across the city. There was the time he'd sent back a steak 8 times at the Harbor Grill, or when he'd gotten a chef fired because the sauce had too much pepper. Just last month, a waitress at the Blue Door had apparently burst into tears after he'd criticized everything from her posture to her accent. Taking a deep breath, Lily approached the table with a genuine smile. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Lily, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Mr. Stone looked up at her, his cold gray eyes meeting hers for just a second before moving to examine his menu. "Bring us 2 bottles of the Chateau Margaux 2010. Lily nodded, knowing that wine alone would cost over $2,000. "Excellent choice, sir. Would anyone like to hear about our specials this evening?" One of the women at the table nodded, but Mr. Stone cut in. "We don't need to hear about specials. We know what we want." He proceeded to order for the entire table without consulting anyone. His companions remained silent, some looking slightly uncomfortable, but none daring to contradict him. Lily wrote everything down carefully, determined not to make a single mistake. As she turned to leave, Mr. Stone added, "And make sure the chef knows who he's cooking for. Everything needs to be perfect." "Of course, sir," Lily replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. "I'll see to it personally." In the kitchen, the staff was already on high alert. "Stone's here," Lily announced, though they'd already heard. The head chef, a usually calm man with 20 years of experience, was checking every plate 3 times. "He wants everything perfect," Lally said, hanging up the order. "Don't they all?" The chef replied with a tight smile. "Don't worry, kid. We've handled worse." But had they? As Lily helped prepare the wine service, she watched Mr. Stone from across the room. He sat at the head of the table, talking while everyone else listened. Occasionally, he'd pound his fist on the table to emphasize a point, causing the glasses to rattle. His dinner companions would nod in agreement, their faces showing a mixture of respect and fear. This wasn't just dinner for Mr. Stone. It was a performance, and they were all his audience, including Lily. With practiced precision, Lily returned to the table with the wine. She presented the bottles to Mr. Stone as she'd been trained, label forward, waiting for his approval before opening them. His eyes barely flicked toward the bottles before he nodded. As she began to pour, she noticed the entire restaurant had grown quieter. Other guests were stealing glances at the famous businessman. The pressure to perform perfectly was immense, but Lily's hands remained steady as she filled each glass precisely to the proper level. "Will there be anything else right now?" she asked when she finished. Mr. Stone finally looked directly at her. A small, unexpected smile formed on his lips. "Not bad," he said, almost to himself. "We'll see if you can keep it up." It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't the harsh criticism she'd expected either. Maybe tonight wouldn't be so terrible after all. But as Lily walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The kitchen buzzed with activity as Lily pushed through the swinging doors. The appetizers for Mr. Stone's table were lined up perfectly on the counter, each plate a work of art. "How's it going out there?" asked the chef, wiping sweat from his brow. Lily shrugged. "So far, so good. He hasn't thrown anything yet." "The night is young," joked Rage as he grabbed drinks for another table. Lily carefully arranged the appetizers on her serving tray. The wait was considerable, but she'd learned the hard way not to make multiple trips when serving important guests. They hated waiting even 30 seconds longer than necessary. Back in the dining room, conversations hummed and silverware clinked against plates. Lily approached Mr. Stone's table with confident steps, her back straight despite the heavy tray. She began serving the appetizers, placing each plate gently in front of its recipient. "The seared scallops," she announced, setting down a plate in front of a woman with striking red hair. "And the foie gras for you, sir," she continued, serving Mr. Stone last, as was proper for the host. He examined the plate with critical eyes, then nodded slightly, the closest thing to approval she'd likely receive. Everything was going perfectly until she reached for the wine bottle to refill their glasses. The evening had been busy, and a small puddle of water from a recently cleared table had gone unnoticed. Lily's shoe caught the slick spot, and though she caught her balance quickly, the wine bottle tilted in her hand. It happened in slow motion. A single drop, just one drop, of the expensive red wine splashed onto the sleeve of Mr. Stone's pristine white dress shirt. The table fell silent. Lily froze, wine bottle still in hand, her eyes fixed on the tiny red spot spreading on the crisp fabric. "I'm so incredibly sorry, sir," she said immediately, placing the bottle down and reaching for her serving napkin. "Let me help." "Don't touch me." Mr. Stone's voice cut through the air like ice. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he said, his voice rising with each word. "This shirt was custom-made in Milan. It costs more than you make in a month." Lily felt her face burn as neighboring tables turned to watch. "I sincerely apologize, sir. The restaurant will cover any cleaning costs." "Cleaning costs?" Mr. Stone laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Look at her, everyone," he announced loudly, gesturing toward Lily. "This is what happens when you settle for mediocrity in life. Stumbling around, ruining other people's evenings because you couldn't manage to get a real education or a real job." The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had paused, peeking through the doors at the commotion. "I want to speak to the manager," Mr. Stone demanded, his face red with anger. "Now." Lily stood frozen in place, clutching her serving napkin. She could feel tears threatening to spill, but she fought them back. Crying would only make this humiliation complete. The restaurant manager appeared quickly, apologizing profusely. "Mr. Stone, please accept our deepest regrets for this unfortunate accident." "Accident? No, this is incompetence," Mr. Stone replied loudly. "Who hires these people? Do you just pull them off the street?" He pointed at Lily without looking at her. "Does she even understand English? Maybe that's the problem." Lily felt as if she'd been slapped. Born and raised just 3 miles from this very restaurant, English was her only language. But Mr. Stone wasn't interested in facts, only in having someone to blame. "Look at her standing there," he continued, finally turning to face Lily again. "Completely useless. Can't even apologize properly. This is why people like you serve people like me. Know your place, girl." Whispers spread through the restaurant. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others embarrassed, but no one spoke up. Mr. Stone was too powerful, too wealthy, too connected. Crossing him was bad for business, bad for careers. The manager gave Lily a sympathetic but firm look. "Why don't you take a break, Lily?" "I'll handle this table." It was a kindness, allowing her to escape, but it felt like defeat. Lily nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she turned to leave, she caught the eye of an elderly man sitting at a nearby table. He looked at her with such kindness that her carefully held composure almost broke. She had to get away before the tears fell. With as much dignity as she could muster, Lily walked toward the kitchen, unaware that in just moments, something extraordinary was about to happen. Lily had almost reached the kitchen doors when something inside her shifted. 3 steps from escape, she stopped. The restaurant remained uncomfortably silent, the weight of Mr. Stone's cruel words hanging in the air. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back, watching, waiting to see what she would do. Run and hide? That's what he expected. That's what everyone expected. Slowly, Lily turned around. Her heart hammered in her chest so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The manager gave her a warning look, silently pleading with her not to make things worse. But some things were more important than a job. Some things were about basic human dignity. She walked back to Mr. Stone's table, her steps measured and deliberate. Mr. Stone had already returned to his seat, apparently satisfied with his outburst, and now discussing business with his companions as if nothing had happened. "Excuse me, Mr. Stone," Lily said, her voice quiet but surprisingly steady. The table fell silent again. Mr. Stone looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance at her return. "What is it now?" "I believe you've done enough damage for one evening." Lily took a deep breath. Her hands were trembling, but she clasped them in front of her to hide it. "I came back to sincerely apologize for the accident with your shirt," she began, maintaining eye contact despite how difficult it was. "I understand it's valuable, and I'm truly sorry for damaging it." Mr. Stone's expression softened slightly, apparently pleased with what he perceived as proper subservience. But Lily wasn't finished. "I also wanted to say something else," she continued. "While I respect you as a customer, and I understand you're upset about your shirt, I don't believe that gives anyone the right to speak to another human being the way you just spoke to me." The restaurant seemed to collectively hold its breath. One of Mr. Stone's dinner companions nearly choked on his wine. The manager began hurrying over, likely to drag Lily away before she could say another word. "I've worked here for 3 years," Lily pressed on, speaking quickly before she could be stopped. "During that time, I've put myself through nursing school. I work double shifts most days so I can help support my younger brother and sister after our parents got sick. I volunteer at the children's hospital on weekends." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm simply pointing out that you don't know me, Mr. Stone. You don't know my story or my worth as a person, just like I don't know yours." The manager had reached them now, but he hesitated, seemingly unsure whether to intervene. "You can insult my job. You can demand I be fired. That's your right as a customer," Lily continued, her voice now clear enough for nearby tables to hear every word. "But I want you to know that while you may have more money than I do, that doesn't make you more valuable as a human being." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her order pad, scribbling something quickly. "This is my name and phone number. When you get the bill for cleaning your shirt, please contact me directly. I may not be able to pay it all at once, but I give you my word that I will pay for the damage I caused." She placed the paper next to his plate, gave a small nod, and turned to leave. "Wait," Mr. Stone's voice stopped her. When she turned back, his expression was unreadable. "You realize I could make one phone call and ensure you never work in this city again," he said, his voice low and controlled. Lily swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I understand that." "And you still chose to say all this." "Some things matter more than a job, Mr. Stone." A strange expression crossed his face, something that might have been respect, or perhaps just surprise that someone like her would stand up to someone like him. Before he could respond, the elderly man from the nearby table rose from his seat and approached them. His movement broke the tension in the room, drawing all eyes to him as he walked with deliberate steps toward Mr. Stone's table. "Pardon the interruption," the old man said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that somehow commanded more respect than Mr. Stone's loud demands ever could. "But I believe I have something important to add to this conversation." The elderly man stood tall despite his age, his silver hair neatly combed, wearing a simple but well-tailored navy suit. He wasn't flashy like Mr. Stone, but something about him commanded respect. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he nodded politely to everyone at the table. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Mr. Stone said, clearly annoyed at another interruption. "And I'm in the middle of a business dinner." "Dr. Thomas Chen," the elderly man said, offering his hand. "Chief of Pediatric Medicine at City Children's Hospital." Mr. Stone's expression changed instantly. The hospital was famous throughout the region, and its board included some of the most influential people in the state. He shook the doctor's hand, suddenly all smiles. "Dr. Chen, of course. Your reputation precedes you. Is there something I can help you with?" "Actually," Dr. Chen said, "I couldn't help but overhearing what happened, and I felt compelled to share something you might find interesting about this young woman." He gestured toward Lily, who looked as surprised as everyone else by his intervention. Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but carried throughout the now silent restaurant. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, after working a full day here, Lily comes to our oncology ward. She reads stories to the children fighting cancer, brings little handmade gifts, and somehow remembers every child's favorite book and toy." Mr. Stone's dinner companions exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of the women looked at Lily with new interest. "Last month," Dr. Chen continued, "one of our most challenging cases, a 5-year-old boy who hadn't spoken since beginning treatment, said his first words in 6 months. It was during one of Lily's visits. She wasn't even reading to him specifically, just to the room. But something in her voice reached him when nothing else could." Lily stared at the floor, her cheeks flushed. She had never wanted recognition for her volunteer work. 3 weeks ago," Dr. Chen went on, "she stayed all night with a little girl whose parents couldn't make it through a snowstorm. The child was terrified of a procedure scheduled for the morning. Lily sat with her, even though she had an exam the next day. An exam for the nursing program she's been working her way through while supporting her younger siblings." The restaurant remained completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen. "I've been in medicine for 43 years, Dr. Chen said, turning to address Mr. Stone directly. I've worked with millionaires, celebrities, politicians, but the people who truly impress me are the ones who give when they have almost nothing to give, who show kindness not because it benefits them, but because it's who they are at their core. Mr. Stone shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For perhaps the first time in years, he seemed at a loss for words. "The stain on your shirt can be cleaned, Mr. Stone," Dr. Chen said quietly. "But the mark left by how we treat others, that stays with us forever." A woman at a nearby table wiped a tear from her eye. The restaurant manager stood motionless, watching the scene unfold. Mr. Stone looked at Lily, really looked at her, perhaps seeing her as a person for the first time. "Is this true? You volunteer at the Children's Hospital?" Lily nodded, finally finding her voice. "Yes, sir. For about 2 years now." "And your siblings? You support them?" "Our parents were in a car accident. Dad didn't make it, and Mom's still recovering. My brother's 16 and my sister's 14. They're good kids. They help a lot." Mr. Stone's face showed a complex mix of emotions: embarrassment, confusion, something that might have been shame. One of his dinner companions, a woman with elegant gray hair, broke the silence. "Tom, perhaps you should reconsider how you've handled this situation." Mr. Stone straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that seemed out of character for such a powerful man. "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "It seems I may have miscalculated." Dr. Chen smiled gently. "We all make mistakes, Mr. Stone. The measure of a person is what they do next." The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. Mr. Stone looked around, suddenly aware that he was the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. The wealthy businessman who had publicly humiliated a hard-working waitress was now faced with a choice that would reveal his true character to everyone watching. His next words would change everything. The silence in the restaurant stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to snap. Mr. Stone looked down at the small wine stain on his expensive shirt, then back at Lily, his expression unreadable. The moment hung in the air until a surprising voice broke the tension. "I have something to say." Everyone turned to see an older woman rising slowly from her seat at a corner table. She wore a simple floral dress and walked with a slight limp as she approached. "My name is June," she said. "My husband and I have been coming to this restaurant every Friday for 15 years. She looked at Lily with warm eyes. "2 months ago, my Harry started choking on a piece of steak, couldn't breathe. I was screaming, frozen with panic, watching the love of my life turning blue." June's voice trembled with the memory. "This young lady," she pointed to Lily, "ran across the restaurant and performed the Heimlich maneuver. Saved his life right in front of me. When we tried to thank her afterward, she just smiled and said anyone would have done the same." An unexpected ripple of applause spread through the dining room. June wasn't finished. "But that's not all. When she learned we were celebrating our 50th anniversary, she brought us a special dessert with candles." June's eyes filled with tears. On her own break time, she'd run next door to the bakery to get it. Wouldn't let us pay her back. As June returned to her seat, a man in a business suit at another table stood up. "She remembers everyone's names," he said. "I'm just a regular guy who comes in for lunch twice a week, but she always asks about my daughter in college. Even remembered when her finals were and asked how they went." From near the kitchen, the young hostess spoke up. "When my car broke down last winter, Lily let me stay at her place for 3 days until it was fixed. She gave me rides to work even though it was out of her way." One by one, other customers and staff members began sharing their own stories about Lily. How she'd helped an elderly man read a menu when he'd forgotten his glasses. How she secretly paid for a young couple's dessert when she overheard it was their first anniversary, but they were on a tight budget. How she always made sure the kitchen staff got proper breaks during busy shifts. Through it all, Lily stood silent, her eyes wide with surprise. She'd never thought her small acts of kindness were anything special or worth remembering. Mr. Stone's dinner companions exchanged glances. One man leaned over and whispered something in Mr. Stone's ear. The wealthy businessman nodded slowly, his face showing conflicting emotions. The restaurant manager stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Mr. Stone, I want to personally apologize for the accident. Our restaurant takes full responsibility." No, Mr. Stone interrupted, holding up his hand. He looked at Lily directly, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. The responsibility is mine. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. No one had expected those words from a man famous for never admitting wrongdoing. I reacted. He seemed to search for the right word, inappropriately to a minor accident. His voice, normally commanding and loud, had softened considerably. My behavior was unacceptable. His business associates looked shocked. The red-haired woman smiled slightly, nodding her approval. This restaurant, Mr. Stone continued, gesturing around him, is clearly more than just a place to eat. It's a community. And it seems I've insulted someone who is the heart of that community. The restaurant remained silent, waiting. No one had ever seen the powerful businessman in this light before. My father was a waiter, Mr. Stone said suddenly, surprising everyone. For 37 years he served others. Came home with aching feet, sometimes having been treated terribly by people who thought their money made them better than him. He looked down at his hands. I promised myself I'd never be like those people, yet here I am. He turned to Lily, who stood frozen in place, unsure what to expect. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said, but I would like the opportunity to make this right. The restaurant held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The powerful millionaire and the waitress faced each other across a divide that suddenly seemed much smaller than before. Mr. Stone looked strangely vulnerable as he stood there waiting for Lily's response. For a man who controlled boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, this moment of genuine human connection seemed to shake him more than any business crisis. Everyone deserves a second chance, Lily said finally, her voice soft but clear. Including you, Mr. Stone. Relief washed over his face. He gestured for her to sit at the empty chair at his table. After a moment's hesitation, she did. Tell me about your nursing program, he said, surprising everyone again. As the restaurant slowly returned to normal, with conversations resuming and waitstaff moving between tables, Lily briefly explained her studies, her goals to work in pediatric care, and the challenges of balancing work, school, and family. Mr. Stone listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. His dinner companions, sensing something important happening, joined the conversation respectfully. By the time dessert was served, the tension had disappeared completely. When it came time for the bill, Mr. Stone pulled out his checkbook. He wrote something, folded the check, and handed it to Lily. Please don't open this until tomorrow, he said quietly. And please understand that this isn't about buying forgiveness. It's about recognizing someone who deserves support. Lily nodded, slipping the folded check into her pocket without looking at it. As Mr. Stone and his party prepared to leave, he shook hands with Dr. Chen. Thank you for the reminder of what truly matters, he said. I think I needed that more than I realized. The next morning, Lily finally opened the check while sitting at her small kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she read the amount, $250,000. In the memo line, Mr. Stone had written, Nursing School Scholarship and Family Support Fund. Attached was a business card with a handwritten note. My foundation would be honored to cover your complete education and living expenses until graduation. No strings attached. Sometimes we need reminding of our better selves. Thank you for that gift. T.S. Lily burst into tears, waking her younger brother who came running from his bedroom. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing's wrong, she managed through happy tears. Everything's about to get a lot easier. 6 months later, Lily stood in her graduation gown, having completed her nursing program with honors. She'd been able to cut back her restaurant hours to focus on her studies, while still having plenty of time to spend with her siblings and continue her volunteer work. As she scanned the audience after receiving her diploma, she spotted Mr. Stone sitting quietly in the back row. He nodded respectfully when their eyes met, then slipped out before she could approach him. The next day, Lily received a delivery at home, a beautiful arrangement of flowers with a note. Congratulations on your achievement. The Children's Hospital Board approved funding for a new pediatric wing yesterday. They're looking for a head pediatric nurse. The position is yours if you want it. You've earned it on your own merit. T.S. What began as a humiliating moment in a restaurant had transformed not just Lily's life, but Mr. Stone himself. In the year that followed, those who knew him noted remarkable changes. he established a foundation supporting healthcare workers from underprivileged backgrounds. His business practices became more employee-focused. He even began volunteering monthly at the children's hospital, reading to the kids just as Lily had done. Sometimes the waitstaff at the Golden Plate would spot Mr. Stone and Lily having lunch together, deep in conversation, the millionaire and the nurse, two people from different worlds who had found unexpected common ground. Their unlikely friendship reminded everyone who knew the story that a single moment of courage could change not just one life, but many. And it all began with a drop of wine on an expensive shirt and a waitress who refused to sacrifice her dignity, even when facing the most powerful man in the city.